Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. The first time I saw it, I thought the lighthouse was beautiful, standing tall against the grey Maine sky, white paint peeling just enough to give it character. I didn't know then that it was watching me back. My name is Dr. Rebecca Walters. 3 months ago, I was just a marine biologist with student loans and big dreams about discovering new species. Now I'm not sure what I am anymore, but I need to write this down before I can't. It started with an email, a research grant to study an underwater trench near the old Caldwell Lighthouse. 3 months of isolation, diving and discovery. When everyone else was fighting for lab space at universities, I was being handed the keys to my own research station. It seemed too good to be true. The drive up the Maine coast was peaceful. My last, truly peaceful moment, though. I didn't know it then. The lighthouse stood at the end of a narrow peninsula, waves crashing against the rocks on both sides. My new home. That's when I met Harold. Harold Pearson, the caretaker. His skin was weathered like old leather, and his eyes. There was something off about them. Too wide, too rarely blinking. "You must be the new researcher," he said, his voice like gravel. He took my heaviest bag without asking. "Been expecting you." The inside of the lighthouse was spotless. Every surface gleamed despite the building's age. Harold moved around with quick, precise movements, showing me the research space set up on the first floor, the kitchen, and my bedroom. "The previous guy left in a hurry," Harold mentioned casually. "His equipment's still here." "What happened to him?" I asked. Harold shrugged. "Some folks aren't cut out for isolation." That night, I found the logbook, hidden inside a desk drawer, not with the official research materials. The handwriting started neat and excited, just like I was. Then it changed. The words got bigger. Messier. The last entry just repeated. "They watch me from below, eyes in the dark water, watching, waiting." I should have left then. The next morning I met Jackson Mercer when his fishing boat pulled up to the small dock below the lighthouse. He was bringing supplies Harold had ordered. His eyes narrowed when I introduced myself. "You diving in that trench?" he asked. I nodded proudly. "That's why I'm here. There are hungry spots in these waters," he said, looking out at the ocean. "Places where boats go in and don't come out. That trench, it's the hungriest of all." I laughed it off. Scientists don't believe in hungry water. My first dive was scheduled for the next day. My equipment was state-of-the-art. Underwater cameras, sample collection tools, and a diving suit that could handle deeper depths than standard gear. I was excited. That night, I noticed the tide. It pulled back so far I could see parts of the ocean floor that should never be exposed. Then it rushed in, almost reaching the lighthouse door. Wrong, all wrong for the moon phase. When I mentioned it to Harold, he just nodded. "Lighthouse wasn't built to warn ships," he finally said when I pressed him. "It was built to monitor." "Monitor what?" I asked. His eyes met mine, and for a moment they seemed to reflect light like an animal's. "Some things need watching, Dr. Walters." I spent that night examining the lighthouse itself. The walls had odd angles, and when I clapped my hands in certain spots, the sound echoed strangely, amplified and distorted. It wasn't built like normal lighthouses. It was built like an antenna. I went to bed with a growing knot in my stomach. Outside my window, the light from the top of the lighthouse swept over the dark water, and somewhere out there, something was stirring in the depths. My first dive was beautiful and terrifying at once. The water near the surface was normal enough. The fish darting around, seaweed swaying. But as I went deeper, everything changed. At 50 feet down, the plants looked wrong. Species that shouldn't exist together, growing in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. At 75 feet, I saw the bioluminescence for the first time. Not the gentle glow of normal deep-sea creatures, but bright, pulsing lights that seemed to respond to my presence. At 100 feet, my equipment started to act up. The compass spun wildly. My depth gauge fluctuated, and my underwater microphone picked up sounds that made my skin crawl, rhythmic pulses and waves that reminded me of speech. I played the recording that night on the lighthouse's computer system. The sounds had a pattern, rising and falling like sentences. I ran it through some analysis software and froze when the results came back. Whatever made those sounds was using structures similar to human language. Not random noise, communication. Harold. He found me listening to the recordings on repeat. He stood in the doorway watching me with those strange eyes. "You heard them," he said. It wasn't a question. "What are they?" I asked. He turned to leave. "Tomorrow's the full moon. Stay out of the water." I didn't listen, of course. Scientists rarely do when curiosity takes hold. I watched him that night instead. From my window, I saw Harold walk down to the shore. He knelt at the water's edge, mixing something in a bowl. Salt water, I realized. Later, he was performing some kind of ritual, speaking words I couldn't hear as the tide rose unnaturally high around his knees. The next day, Jackson didn't show up with our weekly supplies. Harold seemed unsurprised, but I insisted we check on him. We took the lighthouse's small motorboat to where Jackson usually fished. We found his boat drifting empty. Something dark and sticky coated one side. Not blood, but something else. Something that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it. "We need to alert the Coast Guard," I said. Harold just started our boat's motor. Too late for that. That night, I had dreams so vivid they felt real. I was underwater, floating, above a city with impossible architecture, buildings that couldn't exist in our world, angles that hurt my eyes. And within that city, things moved, things that saw me in my dream. I woke gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat that smelled like salt. The next day, I found the locked door. It was hidden behind a storage cabinet in the lighthouse basement. The lock was old but sturdy. It took me hours to find a way to open it. Inside was another room, smaller and filled with specimen jars. They contained things that looked like archaeological finds. Fragments of stone with strange writing, pieces of jewelry made from unknown metals, and biological samples. Some looked almost human, but wrong. Webbed fingers preserved in formaldehyde. A partial jawbone with teeth too sharp, too numerous. One jar was empty, its lid beside it. Whatever had been inside was gone. That's when the power went out. In the sudden darkness, I saw it. Faint lines glowing on the walls, the floor, everywhere. Patterns that had been painted with something phosphorescent, invisible until the lights died. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight and the marks disappeared. But I knew what I'd seen. The entire lighthouse was covered in symbols, hidden in plain sight. When the power returned an hour later, Harold was standing in the doorway of the hidden room. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was different, deeper, with an odd resonance. "What is all this?" I demanded. "History," he replied. "Your history, too, if you look back far enough." Before I could question him further, we heard the sound. A low, vibrating moan that came from everywhere and nowhere. The lighthouse itself seemed to tremble. "It's starting," Harold whispered, looking almost happy. "After all these years of waiting." That night, I broke into the desk in Harold's room. While he was outside doing his strange ritual, I found it there, the journal of Thomas Caldwell, the lighthouse's architect. It was filled with drawings of the structure, with notes about acoustic amplification and signal boosting. One page showed a diagram of the lighthouse with sound waves extending down into the ocean trench. The final pages contained a confession. The lighthouse had never been meant to warn ships away from the rocks. It had been built to send a signal down into the depths, a calling to something ancient that slept below, and according to Caldwell's final, frantic notes, after nearly 100 years, it was finally waking up. The next day, I did something incredibly stupid. I went diving alone. I had to know what was down there. The research, the specimens, the symbols, none of it made sense unless I saw for myself. At 120 feet, deeper than I'd gone before, my camera captured something massive moving at the edge. Of visibility. The size didn't register at first. My brain refused to accept it. Then I realized, if I could see it from that distance, it had to be enormous. Hundreds of feet long, at least. At 150 feet, it happened. A figure swam out of the darkness. For one crazy moment, I thought another diver had followed me down. But as it got closer, I saw the differences. The face was almost human, but the eyes were too large, unblinking. It had gills along its neck, and its hands. The webbing between the fingers extended to the second knuckle. It reached for me, mouth, opening to reveal too many teeth. I scrambled for the surface, heart pounding. Harold was waiting at the dock when I dragged myself out of the water. "You saw one," he said, helping me with my equipment. His hands were cold and damp, though he hadn't been in the water. One of the scouts. Inside, he made me tea. My hands shook as I held the cup. "What was that thing?" I demanded. "We call them the deep ones," Harold said, his voice oddly gentle. "They've been here longer than us, much longer." Then he rolled up his sleeve. The skin on his forearm had a faint pattern, almost like scales. "Catching the light. I'm part of them," he said, "many generations back, but the blood remains. That's why I'm the keeper here." Everything spilled out then. How the deep ones had made contact with humans centuries ago. How certain families along the coast carried their bloodline. How the lighthouse families had been specially chosen for their mixed heritage. "The transformation is slow," Harold explained. "It takes most of a lifetime. But it comes for all of us with the blood." "Why are you telling me this?" His eyes met mine, sad and knowing. "Look at your hands, Dr. Walters." I looked down. Between my fingers, the skin had taken on a translucent quality, stretching just a little further than it had before. "No," I whispered, "that's impossible." "Check your family history," Harold said. "I'd wager you had ancestors from coastal Maine. The blood calls us back, generation after generation. That night I did exactly that. I called my mother in a panic, asking about our family history. Yes, she confirmed, puzzled by my urgency. Her grandmother had come from a small fishing village, not 20 miles from where I now stood. I went through the files in the hidden room again, more carefully this time. I found government documents, classified reports about the Innsmouth, anomalies and genetic deviations in coastal populations. They knew, they had always known. My underwater camera had continued recording after I fled from the humanoid figure. I forced myself to review the footage. In the background, barely visible, massive structures rising from the ocean floor. A city, just like in my dreams, and worst of all, in one frame, clear as day, hundreds of the creatures gathered around what looked like a temple. Some looked almost completely human. Others were in various stages of transformation. I confronted Harold the next morning. He was changing more visibly now, his neck pulsing oddly as if something was forming beneath the skin. "Why me?" I demanded. "Why bring me here?" "Your grant," he said. "Look into who funded it." I did. The Esoteric Marine Research Foundation, a shell company with a board of directors whose names matched old lighthouse keeper records. "They've been planning this for generations," Harold explained. "Finding those with the blood, bringing them back to the coast when the time was right." "What time?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The awakening," he said. The one below is nearly conscious now. When it fully wakes, the change will accelerate in all who carry the blood. Not just here, everywhere. That night, I experienced it myself. The voice in my head, ancient and vast. It showed me visions of the deep ocean trenches when they were shallow seas, of civilizations before humans walked the earth, of a future where we returned to the water, evolved for the coming changes. They're not taking us over, Harold told me the next day, seeing my horror. They're saving us. The world is changing. The waters will rise. Those who can adapt will survive. And the rest? I asked. Harold just looked at me sadly. I noticed the changes in myself over the next week. My night vision improved dramatically. I could hold my breath underwater for impossible lengths of time. The webbing between my fingers extended, and strange dreams filled my sleep. Dreams of swimming in the deep without equipment, breathing water as easily as air. Harold was changing faster. His skin developed a silvery sheen. His neck rippled as gills formed. He spent longer periods in the bathtub filled with salt water. It's not painful, he assured me. Just different. I called the outside world for help. When the government team arrived, I thought I was saved. They weren't there to rescue me. The process has been monitored for decades, the lead agent explained, setting up equipment to record my transformation. We can't stop it, but we can learn from it. They showed me more files, reports from coastal towns showing increased rates of unusual births. Children born with slight webbing, enhanced swimming abilities. It wasn't just happening here. It was everywhere with deep water, and during a massive storm that hit the coast that week, I saw it. The entity from the trench, partially risen, a mountain of flesh and ancient purpose. Even from miles away, I felt its presence in my mind, calling to something in my DNA that recognized it as kin. The lighthouse was the key. Built with precise mathematical proportions, it didn't just send signals down. It amplified the entities. Call back up. I realized that destroying the lighthouse might slow the process. In a hidden bunker near the lighthouse, left from World War II, I found old explosives. Still viable after all these years. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I felt I had no choice. I set the charges around the lighthouse's base while Harold was submerged in his bathtub ritual. The government team had left temporarily to escape the storm. I remember the explosion, the way the lighthouse shuddered, resisted, then began to fall. I remember running, the ground shaking beneath my feet, then darkness. I woke up miles inland. Someone had found me on the road and taken me to a hospital. I told them nothing about what had happened. For a while I thought I was safe, that maybe, away from the water, away from the entity's influence, the changes would stop. I was wrong. The news reported a tsunami had hit the Maine coast. Unusually localized, they said. A freak accident. The government blamed it on underwater landslides. They quarantined the coastal towns, citing a toxic algal bloom. 6 months later, I'm still changing. Slower than before, but it hasn't stopped. The call is in my blood now. I find myself drawn to water, any water, lakes, rivers, even bathtubs. Each day it gets harder to breathe air. I've done research, found others like me online speaking, encoded messages. The transformation is happening everywhere, to everyone with the bloodline, and those without it, the water is changing them too, more slowly. Something in the tsunami spread microscopic catalysts for miles. Last week, I found myself driving back toward the coast. I couldn't stop myself. It was like a migration, an instinct deeper than thought. On the highway, I passed dozens of cars heading the same way. In the driver's seats, I glimpsed faces with the same changes as mine. The deep one was right. The world is changing. The waters are rising. This isn't an invasion, it's evolution. Tomorrow I'll reach the coast. I'll join Harold and the others entering the water during the red tide. It doesn't scare me anymore. The most terrifying thing? I'm starting to see the beauty in it. If anyone finds this journal, know this. Check your inland lakes and rivers. The patterns are there, unusual tidal movements where there should be none. The deep ones aren't just in the ocean anymore. They're everywhere water touches, and soon we will be too. Dr. Rebecca Walters, July 17th, 1978. I still hear them at night. The whispers, the footsteps, the sounds no human throat could make. Sometimes I think I'm going crazy. Other times I know I'm not crazy enough to understand what's really happening in these woods. My name is Douglas Hayes. I've been a forest ranger for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything until I came to Whispering Pines. I requested this remote outpost in Olympic National Forest for a simple reason. My life was falling apart. After 12 years of marriage, my wife left me for her yoga instructor. Cliché, I know, but it hurt all the same. I needed space, silence, and time to put myself back together. "You sure about Whispering Pines?" my supervisor asked when I put in for the transfer. "That outpost hasn't been permanently manned in 7 years. "Why not?" I asked. He shuffled some papers on his desk. "Last ranger assigned there, guy named Michaels, disappeared. Search teams found nothing. Most likely he got lost hiking or had an accident. We've only used it for seasonal work since then. That should have been my first warning. Instead, it felt perfect. No one around for miles. Just me, my dog Rex, and the trees. The cabin was a mess when I arrived. Roof leaked in 3 places. Mice had chewed through most of the furniture, and the radio system was dead. But I didn't mind. The work kept my hands busy and my mind quiet. During those first 2 weeks, I cleaned, repaired, and restored. I fixed the roof, patched the walls, and finally got the shortwave radio working. Base station was 46 miles away, close enough for emergencies, far enough to feel properly alone. "Checking in from Whispering Pines," I said on my first successful transmission. "Douglas Hayes reporting for duty." "Copy that, Whispering Pines," came the crackling reply. "Good to have someone out there again. Been too long." I felt proud. A new beginning. Just me and Rex in our little kingdom of pine and silence. Then things started to change. It began with the stones. I woke up one morning to find small stone formations around the perimeter of my cabin. Not random piles, carefully stacked towers, some almost 2 feet high. Perfect balance, impossible to have happened naturally. "What do you think, Rex?" I asked my German shepherd as we circled the cabin. He sniffed the stones and whined. "Yeah, probably just hikers messing around, but we hadn't seen any hikers, and the dirt around the stones showed no footprints. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind picked up, moaning through the trees like a wounded animal. Rex kept going to the window, his ears perked up, staring into the darkness. I told myself it was just deer, or maybe a curious bear. While checking for leaks during a heavy rainfall, I found it, a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard near the fireplace. Inside was a leather journal, the cover stained and weathered. The name inside, Thomas Michaels, the missing ranger. My hands shook as I opened it. Most entries were normal, weather patterns, wildlife sightings, maintenance logs. But the later entries became strange. Day 67. The shadows move wrong here. When the sun sets behind the western ridge, things appear in the tree line. Watching. I've started counting them. Yesterday there were 7. Today there are 12. Day 89. Found. More stone formations. Knocked them down yesterday. They're back today, bigger. The patterns mean something I can almost understand. Day 112. The watchers in the trees are getting closer. They know I see them now. The final entry was just 5 words. They are not what we think. I closed the journal, telling myself Michaels had clearly lost his mind from isolation. It happens to people in remote postings. Isolation plays tricks on the mind. That night, I noticed the fog for the first time. It rolled in just after sunset, thick and grey, but moving against the wind. It seemed to flow between the trees like it had a mind of its own, stopping just at the edge of the clearing where my cabin stood. In my desk drawer, I found a stack of old Polaroid photos, probably left by Michaels. Most were normal forest scenes, but in several there were strange, dark shapes among the trees. Too tall and thin to be human, too structured to be shadows. In one photo, what looked like eyes reflected the camera flash. Yellow eyes, at least. 7 feet off the ground, the next morning brought my first visitor. A Native American man in hiking gear appeared at my door, introducing himself as Liam Redfeather. Just passing through, he said, though something in his eyes told me otherwise. "You're the new ranger?" "Douglas Hayes," I replied, offering coffee, which he accepted. As he sat on my porch, he studied the tree line with careful eyes. "My grandfather's people have stories about these woods," he said finally. "They called this place the Thin Forest. Why's that?" "They believe the boundary between worlds grows thin here, that things can cross over." He sipped his coffee. "They spoke of the walking hunger, beings that watch from the trees." I laughed nervously. "Sounds like campfire stories." He didn't smile. "The old ones never came here after dark. They said the forest remembers you once you've been here. It calls you back." After Liam left, I tried to dismiss his stories as local superstition, but that night, Rex wouldn't stop staring into the forest, his body rigid, a low whimper in his throat. When I turned off the lights, I swear I could see eyes reflecting in the darkness between the trees, dozens of them, blinking in and out of existence. Just wildlife, I told myself, just the isolation making me jumpy. There's nothing supernatural in these woods, but deep down, I was starting to wonder if I was wrong. After a heavy rainfall, I found the footprints. They circled the entire cabin, massive impressions in the mud that made my heart stop. 22 inches long, with 5 toes, but shaped all wrong for a bear. I made plaster casts before they dried out, telling myself I was documenting an undiscovered species, nothing more. The radio started picking up strange sounds during my regular check-ins, guttural noises that didn't sound like any language I knew. Static would overtake the frequency, and beneath it, something that sounded like words spoken backward. "You're getting some interference on your end," the base station operator told me. "Voice keeps cutting in. Someone else on this frequency?" "No," I said. "I'm alone out here." But I wasn't sure anymore. The morning Rex disappeared broke something in me. I woke to find the cabin door open, though I was certain I'd locked it. Rex was gone. I spent hours calling for him, hiking in widening circles around the cabin. Near a stand of ancient pines, I found his collar. It was covered in thick, clear slime, like saliva, but wrong somehow. When I touched it, my fingers tingled and went numb for hours. I took a sample in a jar, marking it for analysis. That night I woke to silence. The forest, normally alive with sounds, had gone completely quiet. I looked out my window and felt my breath catch. Surrounding the cabin in a perfect circle were dozens of deer, all standing motionless, all facing the cabin. Their eyes reflected the moonlight, unblinking. They stood that way for hours, not moving, not making a sound. Just before dawn, as one, they turned and walked into the forest. Liam returned the next day. This time, he wasn't pretending to be just passing through. "I spoke to my grandmother," he said. "She's an elder. She says you need to leave this place." "I can't," I replied. "I have a job." "The boundaries are thinning," he insisted. "What sleeps on the other side is waking up. It's been happening slowly for decades, but it's accelerating now." I showed him the plaster cast of the footprint. His face went pale. "The forest protectors," he whispered, My people believed they guarded the doorway between worlds. After he left, I hiked deeper into the forest than I'd gone before. I found trees marked with symbols I didn't recognize. Complex spirals and angular shapes scored deep into the bark. Not carved with tools, the marks looked like they'd been made with claws. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in, bringing lightning that turned the sky purple instead of blue. During one bright flash, I raised my camera and snapped a photo of the tree line. When I developed it, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Standing between two pines was a figure, bipedal, but at least 8 feet tall with proportions that weren't human. Its arms hung down past its knees, and its head was shaped wrong, too angular, too large. The nightly attacks on the cabin began soon after. Something large testing the walls, the foundation, the roof. The entire structure would shake as if in an earthquake. I'd fire warning shots from my rifle and the attacks would stop, only to begin again the next night. I found hair samples caught on the rough wood of my shutters. Some looked like animal hair, but too thick, while others appeared human but with an unusual texture. I put them in sample bags, telling myself I'd take them to a lab. Have a rational explanation. In a forgotten storage locker, I discovered a box of tape recordings left by Michaels. I played them on an old cassette player, listening to his descent into the same madness I felt approaching. The forest exists in multiple planes simultaneously, his voice explained on the final recording. The indigenous people knew it. That's why they avoided this place. Something about the geology, the magnetic fields perhaps, causes what I'm calling dimensional thinning. Reality is porous here, and something is pushing through. The tape ended with sounds of breaking glass, a scream, and then footsteps moving away from the recorder. Heavy footsteps, inhuman footsteps. I told myself I could still leave, pack up radio for pickup and go back to civilization. But something was happening to me. I felt connected to the forest now. I needed to know the truth. And part of me sensed that it was already too late to run. I heard the crying at dawn, a high-pitched keening sound that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. I followed it deep into the forest, to a clearing I'd never seen before. There, caught in an illegal hunter's trap, was what appeared to be a juvenile Sasquatch. That's the only word my mind could assign to it. About 5 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair, with a face that blended ape and human features in a way that seemed impossible. It was struggling against a steel trap clamped on its leg, making that terrible sound. I approached slowly, hands raised. "I'm going to help you," I said, though I had no idea if it could understand. Its eyes locked on mine, deep amber with vertical pupils like a cat's. Then I felt it, a presence in my mind, images flashing through my consciousness. The creature was communicating with me without words. As I worked to free its leg from the trap, I sensed movement in the forest around me. We weren't alone. Standing at the edge of the clearing were 3 adult specimens, each over 8 feet tall, their muscle mass impossible by human standards. They made no move to attack, simply watched as I freed the younger one. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about reality. The tallest one stepped forward, and the shadow it cast moved independently of its body, stretching, twisting into shapes that hurt my eyes. It reached toward me, not with its physical hand, but with its shadow, which somehow touched my forehead. My mind exploded with images, ancient forests, stars in unfamiliar configurations, beings that existed partly in our dimension and partly elsewhere. I understood then what they were showing me. These weren't just undiscovered primates. They were guardians, protectors of an ancient gateway between dimensions that existed deep in the Olympic forest. They'd been here for thousands of years, descendants of humans who had been transformed by proximity to the dimensional rift. There, Physical bodies were merely anchors, allowing their consciousness to exist partly in our world while monitoring the gateway. And the gateway was failing. I followed them deeper into the forest, to places where physics seemed optional. Gravity fluctuated, stones hovering inches above the ground. Time moved differently. I watched a butterfly flap its wings in slow motion while clouds raced overhead. They brought me to an ancient ceremonial site where they performed a ritual. As they moved in precise patterns, their true forms became visible to me. Their bodies shed the physical dimension like a cloak, revealing beings composed of geometric patterns that hurt my human mind to perceive, colors that didn't exist in our spectrum, angles that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. I passed out. When I woke, I was back in my cabin with no memory of how I'd returned. But the knowledge they'd shared remained. 3 days later, a Forest Service search team arrived. I'd missed my scheduled radio check-ins, and they'd come to investigate. 4 rangers, led by a senior officer named Carter. They looked at me strangely, commenting on my wild appearance and the strange modifications I'd made to the cabin. Protective symbols carved into the door frames, windows lined with odd-smelling herbs Liam had brought me. "Are you okay, Hayes?" Carter asked. "You seem different." That night, 2 of the search team disappeared from their tents. We found their clothes the next morning, neatly laid out in the forest, filled with leaves and soil, as if the men had somehow turned to forest matter and seeped away, leaving only their garments behind. Carter panicked, grabbing his radio to call for emergency evacuation. The remaining ranger, Davis, watched him with an odd smile. When Carter's back was turned, I saw Davis's shadow move independently of his body. That's when I realized Davis wasn't who he appeared to be. "You're one of them," I whispered when Carter stepped outside. Davis's smile widened unnaturally. "Not exactly. I serve what lies beyond the rift. The true power the Sasquatch tried to contain. He was part of a cult. They'd worked for decades to weaken the dimensional boundary, causing the strange phenomena in these woods. The disappearances, the warping of reality, all part of their plan to open the gateway completely." "What's on the other side?" I asked. "Freedom," Davis replied. "Gods, older than time. They'll remake this world into something more interesting." Carter came back inside, his face pale. "Radio's dead. We need to hike out now." But as we stepped outside, we all saw it. Reality literally breaking down around us. The sky rippled, like water. Trees bent at impossible angles. The clearing around the cabin seemed to stretch and contract like a breathing thing. The rift was opening. My consciousness began splitting between dimensions. One moment I was myself, standing in the forest. The next, I could perceive reality from multiple angles simultaneously, seeing the cabin from above, from within the walls, from the perspective of the trees themselves. Carter collapsed. Blood pouring from his eyes and ears as his mind failed to process what it was experiencing. Davis began chanting in that same guttural language I'd heard on the radio, cutting his palm and letting blood drip onto the forest floor. The earth absorbed it hungrily, and with each drop, the distortions intensified. I felt the Sasquatch before. I saw them, their minds touching mine, urgent now. They showed me what would happen if the rift fully opened. Entities would pour through, beings that existed in 4 or more dimensions, their very presence warping our reality until nothing recognizable remained. The Sasquatch had been human once, transformed over generations of guarding the rift. The proximity to dimensional bleeding had changed them, gifted them with abilities beyond human understanding. But even they couldn't close the rift alone. They needed help. My help. I realized why I'd felt so connected to the forest, why I couldn't bring myself to leave. I was changing too. In the cabin's bathroom mirror, I'd seen the first signs, my eyes developing a faint amber tint, vertical pupils in certain light, my skin hardening slightly, a pattern like bark beginning to form on My forearms. The transformation had already begun. I was becoming like them. Davis saw it too. "You're too late," he laughed. "The convergence has started. You can feel it, can't you? The old one's reaching through." And I could. Beyond the rift, I sensed vast consciousnesses stirring, ancient beyond comprehension, hungry for new realities to consume. Their attention turned toward our world like a spotlight, and where it fell, reality crumbled. Carter was dead now, his body twisting in on itself as dimensional physics rewrote his cellular structure. The remaining ranger fled screaming into the forest, only to freeze mid-step when he crossed into a pocket where time had stopped. Davis continued his ritual, his body now hovering several inches above the ground, his shadow expanding to cover acres of forest. The rift was manifesting physically now. A tear in the air itself, edges glowing with light that wasn't light, revealing geometries that couldn't exist. The Sasquatch surrounded me, communicating their plan. The rift existed physically in our dimension as a cave system beneath the forest floor. If it collapsed, the connection would be severed, temporarily, long enough to reset the boundaries. But the collapse required a sacrifice. A conscious being existing in both states, partly human, partly transformed, would need to physically enter the rift as it collapsed, becoming the seal that would hold it closed. I knew it had to be me. In the ranger station supply shed, I found what I needed. Old dynamite used for clearing fallen trees, blasting caps, detonators. As Davis's ritual reached its climax, I slipped away, following the Sasquatch to the physical entrance of the cave. System, deep underground I saw it, the heart of the rift. A chamber where reality itself had worn thin, where matter flickered in and out of existence. The walls pulsed with light, revealing glimpses of landscapes that couldn't exist. Cities with impossible architecture, oceans of what looked like liquid metal, skies filled with geometric shapes instead of stars, and reaching through tentacles, limbs, concepts given physical form. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. I knew only that if they fully entered our world, nothing would survive. I set the charges around the chamber, my hands moving with strange new knowledge. Davis found me as I was connecting the final detonator. "They showed you nothing!" he screamed, his body now barely human, stretched and distorted. "The glory that awaits. We will ascend." "We will die," I replied simply. "Some things aren't meant for us to understand." He lunged for me, but a massive Sasquatch intervened, holding him back. I activated the timer, 30 seconds. Not enough time for escape. But that was never the plan. As Davis screamed curses, I stepped toward the center of the rift, feeling my body begin to come apart at the molecular level. The pain was beyond anything I could have imagined, but with it came understanding. I saw the history of the forest, the thousands of years the Sasquatch had guarded this place. I saw other guardians before them, other sacrifices. The explosives detonated. The cave collapsed. And I expanded. My consciousness spread through the dimensional boundary, becoming part of the seal that separated worlds. My last physical sensation was of my body dissolving into pure energy. Time passed differently where I existed now. What seemed moments to me was months in the physical world. I watched as search teams found the remains of Carter and Davis, ruling their deaths as a wildlife. Attack. I watched as the forest healed, the dimensional bleeding slowly subsiding. 6 months later, they assigned a new ranger to the rebuilt Whispering Pines outpost, young guy named Peterson. He found my journal hidden in the same compartment where I'd discovered Michael's records. He read it, laughed it off as the ravings of an isolated man, but I can see the changes beginning in him already. The vivid dreams he has of moving through the forest from multiple perspectives, the way he started to hear the thoughts of animals around the cabin, the bark-like patterns forming on his skin that he hides under long sleeves. When he looks, In mirrors or still water, sometimes he sees my face instead of his own. I'm trying to warn him, the rift is only sealed temporarily. Already it's beginning to open again. The cycle continues. Last night, Peterson walked into the forest at midnight, drawn by voices only he could hear. He stood among the ancient pines, feeling the transformation accelerating in his body. Above him, shapes moved in the canopy, the watchers in the trees, my brothers and sisters now. He looked up at us and finally understood. He is not alone in these woods. He never was, and neither are you. I still remember the exact moment when the woods first spoke to me, not in whispers or rustling leaves like you might expect, but in perfect, crystal-clear words that matched my own voice so exactly it made my skin crawl. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Edward Harrison, and until 6 months ago, I was America's king of horror fiction. At least that's what the book jackets called me. 15 bestsellers in 12 years, movie deals, foreign rights, the whole package. Then the words stopped coming. 3 months without writing a single usable page will make any author desperate. When my agent mentioned an isolated cabin in northern Michigan, perfect for clearing your head, Ed, I jumped at the chance. No internet, no neighbors, no distractions. Just me, my typewriter, and the vast silence of the woods. The cabin looked exactly like you'd imagine. Weathered logs, wide porch, chimney stretching toward the sky. As I unloaded my car that first afternoon, the dense wall of trees surrounding. The property seemed to watch me. I laughed at myself. Professional paranoia, I guess. When you make your living scaring people, you start seeing threats everywhere. You must be Mr. Harrison. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The voice belonged to a tall, leathery man who'd appeared silently beside my car. Floyd Wilson, he said, extending a calloused hand. I look after the properties up here. Bring supplies once a month to folks who need 'em. His eyes never quite met mine, always drifting to the tree line instead. Thanks, I said, shaking his hand. Any neighbors I should know about? Floyd shook his head. Nearest soul's about 5 miles down the road. You really wanted isolation, you found it. He handed me a folded map. Property boundaries, stick to the paths when you're walking. Woods can get confusing, even for locals. Before leaving, he added something that seemed odd at the time. Previous owner left in a hurry. Kept talking about voices in the trees. City folk sometimes can't handle the quiet up here. Minds play tricks. That first night, the silence was so complete it buzzed in my ears. I sat at my typewriter, fingers hovering over the keys, waiting for inspiration that refused to come. Instead of writing, I explored the cabin, solid pine furniture, stone fireplace, walls lined with bookshelves, practical and comfortable, if a bit dusty. The basement door caught my attention, heavy oak, with an unusual lock. The key hung on a nail beside it, almost inviting me down. Wooden steps creaked under my weight as I descended into cool, damp air. What I found changed everything. A small room, walls lined with shelves of cassette tapes, carefully labeled with dates stretching back to the 1970s. A reel-to-reel recorder sat on a desk beside a modern tape player. Next to them lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. I picked a random tape labeled North Clearing, June 18th, 1983, and slid it into the player. Static filled the room, then silence, then a man's voice. Soft, methodical. Day 16 of recording. North Clearing remains active. Temperature drops approximately 15 degrees upon entering the perimeter. More silence. Then, faintly, what sounded like voices. Distant, unintelligible murmurs that made the hair on my arm stand up. The man's voice returned, excited now. They're responding to my questions. Third consistent contact. Playing back my morning recordings produces new responses each time. I listened to 3 more tapes that night, each one documenting acoustic anomalies throughout the property. The journal proved even more disturbing. detailed maps of the surrounding forest with areas marked as thin spots where echoes come through. The previous owner, Dr. Thomas Reiner, had meticulously documented years of strange phenomena. Unusual animal behavior, temperature fluctuations, and what he called acoustic reflections that couldn't be explained by normal environmental factors. That night, I dreamed of walking forest paths I'd never seen, my feet somehow knowing every turn and route. I woke up at my typewriter. 3 pages of manuscript completed in my handwriting, pages I had no memory of writing. They were brilliant, the best opening to a novel I'd ever produced. Dark, visceral, with a voice that felt simultaneously mine and not mine. The story featured a man lost in woods where reality itself seemed to bend. Over the next week, this pattern continued. Days spent exploring the property, nights filled with vivid dreams, and mornings discovering pages I didn't remember writing. The writer's block that had plagued me for months was gone. I began mapping my own explorations against Dr. Reiner's journals. Something odd stood out immediately. His property. Boundaries didn't match the modern map Floyd had given me. According to Reiner's markings, the property had somehow shifted over the decades, as if the land itself was slowly moving. During my hikes, I found old survey markers that confirmed Reiner's maps. Someone had redrawn the property lines to exclude certain areas of the forest, including most of the locations marked as thin spots. On my 9th day at the cabin, I encountered something impossible. About a mile into the woods, following one of Reiner's marked paths, I stepped from warm summer air into a perfect circle of winter cold. The temperature must have dropped 30 degrees in a single step. Inside this circle, perhaps 20 feet. Across, my breath fogged. Outside it, summer heat shimmered. As I stood there, stunned, I noticed the silence. No birds, no insects, nothing but the sound of my own breathing. When I placed my digital recorder on the ground and hit record, the battery instantly drained. That night I dreamed I wasn't alone in the cabin. A figure that looked exactly like me watched from doorways, always vanishing when I turned my head. In the dream, I found myself in the basement, playing the tapes backward and hearing clear, precise instructions in my own voice. I woke to find my furniture rearranged, subtle differences I might have dismissed as faulty memory, if not for the coffee mug sitting in the center of my manuscript pages. A mug I was certain I'd left in the kitchen sink. When Floyd arrived with monthly supplies, the next morning, I tried to sound casual as I asked about Dr. Reiner. "Reiner?" Floyd said, eyes darting to the trees. "Smart man, too smart maybe. Started with scientific interest, ended up obsessed." "What happened to him?" I asked. Floyd stacked canned goods in my pantry. "Same thing that happened to the 3 owners before him. Same thing that happens to anyone who stays too long and listens too carefully." He turned to face me. "They disappear, or they die. Or sometimes they just change so much that leaving's not an option anymore." "What does that mean?" I pressed. "You found the tapes," he said. Not a question. I nodded. "And the journal? The maps?" Another nod. Floyd sighed. "Then you know about the thin spots, places where something else bleeds through." He glanced at my manuscript pages. "You're writing again." "Better than ever," I admitted. "But you don't remember doing it, do you?" When I didn't answer, he continued, "It's already starting. You need to leave, Mr. Harrison, today. Pack your car and don't look back." I should have listened. God, I should have listened. But the manuscript called to me. 50 brilliant pages. I couldn't have written on my own. The solution to my creative drought. "I can't leave," I told him honestly. Floyd's expression hardened. "Then stick to the paths. Don't record anything, and for God's sake, don't go looking for the stone circle." Of course, that's exactly what I did next. The stone circle wasn't marked on any of Dr. Reiner's maps, which seemed odd given how meticulously he documented everything else. Floyd's warning only made me more determined to find it. I spent the next 3 days methodically searching the woods, venturing farther from the marked paths than I dared before. On the third afternoon, as the sun was beginning to dip, I found it, a perfect circle of standing stones in a clearing that felt unnaturally symmetrical. 12 stones, each about waist high, arranged with mathematical precision. Each stone featured unusual patterns that, at first glance, looked like fossils. Closer inspection revealed something disturbing. The patterns resembled human faces caught in expressions of terror or pain. I took photographs, but when I reviewed them later, the images showed only blank stones. The faces were visible only to the naked eye. That night, I experienced the first significant gap in my memory. I went to bed at 11 p.m. and woke at my typewriter at 7 a.m. with no recollection of the hours between. Beside me sat 15 new manuscript pages and a cup of cold coffee I didn't remember making. The new pages described in vivid detail the stone circle I'd discovered, but included information I couldn't possibly know. The text explained that the stones had been quarried from a cave system beneath the property, from a chamber where the walls whispered continually in many voices. More disturbing was the story's new direction. What had begun as a fairly standard horror narrative about a haunted forest was evolving into something more complex. The protagonist discovering that the forest spirits were actually reflections of himself and every person who had ever entered the woods, trapped in a kind of dimensional pocket and desperate to escape. I told myself this was just my subconscious working through creative ideas, that the sleep writing was some kind of self-hypnosis brought on by stress and isolation. Deep down, I knew better. Over the next week, the abnormal became my new normal. I'd wake to find furniture rearranged. Objects would disappear from one room and appear in another. My digital recordings captured voices speaking backwards, voices that, when reversed, formed coherent sentences in my own voice, commenting on actions I hadn't yet taken. "You'll go to the North Clearing tomorrow and see yourself waiting there. You'll discover the oldest recordings contain your voice from 30 years ago. You've always been here. You'll always be here." When I played these recordings during the day, nothing unusual happened. But when played at night, they sometimes received responses, whispered comments from what sounded like a crowd of people speaking just slightly out of sync. And then there were the mirrors. I first noticed it while brushing my teeth. A slight delay in my reflections' movements. By the third week, the delay had grown to nearly a second, long enough that I could move my hand and distinctly see my reflection catch up. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I'd catch my reflection making movements I wasn't making. Floyd stopped coming. When he was 2 weeks overdue for his supply delivery, I drove my car down the access road to find help. 5 miles from the cabin, I found Floyd's truck abandoned beside the road. Driver's door open, keys in the ignition. The engine started perfectly when I tried it. There was no sign of Floyd. I should have kept driving, should have left everything behind and returned to civilization. Instead, I drove back to the cabin, telling myself I needed to collect my manuscript at least. The truth was darker. I couldn't leave. Some part of me needed to understand what was happening in those woods. Back at the cabin, I made a discovery that chilled me more than anything that had come before. While searching through Dr. Reiner's journal for any mention of the stone circle, I found entries I hadn't seen before. Entries in my handwriting describing events of the past week. Events I had no memory of documenting. Encountered another reflection today while collecting water from the stream. It watched me from the opposite bank, mirroring my movements exactly until I made a deliberate gesture with my left hand while moving my right. The reflection followed my right-hand movement, revealing itself as independent entity. The entries continued, describing tests and experiments I never conducted, observations I never made. Yet they were unquestionably written in my hand. That Night, I woke to the sound of typing. Someone was at my typewriter, keys clacking rapidly in the dark. When I turned on the light, the chair was empty, the typewriter still. But a new page sat in the carriage, the ink still wet. We are becoming more real. Soon, we won't need the thin spots to exist. I burned the page in the fireplace and watched the smoke curl up the chimney. As the paper blackened and curled, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Soft laughter, identical to my own, coming from every corner of the room simultaneously. I didn't sleep again that night. As dawn broke, I hiked to one of the thin spots Dr. Reiner had marked on his map, a small clearing about half a mile from the cabin. I needed answers, even if they terrified me. The clearing looked ordinary in the morning light, just a patch of grass surrounded by dense trees. But as I approached its center, the air seemed to thicken, as if I was walking through invisible cobwebs. That's when I saw him, me, standing at the opposite edge of the clearing. My doppelganger wore the same clothes I did, had the same 2-day stubble on his face. He raised his hand in greeting, and I found myself mirroring the gesture before I could think. "Hello, Edward," he said, with my voice, my inflections. "I've been looking forward to finally speaking with you directly." I couldn't move, couldn't run. My feet felt rooted to the forest floor as I stared at my own face, smiling back at me from across the clearing. "What are you?" My voice came out as a whisper. My double smile widened slightly. "I'm you, Edward. One version of you, at least." He took a step forward, and I noticed something unsettling. The edges of his form seemed to blur slightly, as if he wasn't quite solid. "We're echo people, reflections of everyone who's ever entered these woods." "That's impossible," I said, though I knew I was looking at living proof. He shrugged with my exact mannerisms. "Dimensional physics is complicated. The simplest explanation is that this forest exists in multiple realities simultaneously. The thin spots are places where those realities overlap most strongly." As he spoke, I noticed movements at the edges of the clearing, shadowy figures watching from between trees. Some looked vaguely human, others were just shapes suggesting human form. We exist first as echoes, reflections caught in the thin places, my double continued. With enough energy, we can become more substantial, more real. "Energy from what?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "From you, your creativity, your memories, your essence." He gestured toward the cabin. "Why do you think you've been writing so well? Those pages aren't just yours, Edward. We've been helping." Cold realization washed over me. "You've been writing through me while I sleep." "We've been collaborating," he corrected. "You provide the raw creative energy. We shape it. You've never written better, have you?" He was right. The manuscript was brilliant, deeper and more insightful than anything I'd produced before. A perfect blend of horror and existential dread. "What do you want from me?" I asked. My double's expression turned serious. "Freedom. We want out of the thin spots, out of this forest. We want to exist fully. By replacing me. It wasn't a question. By merging with you. We're already halfway there." He pointed to my hand, and I looked down to see my skin momentarily turn transparent in the morning light, showing shadows of bone beneath before becoming solid again. I ran, crashed through the underbrush, ignoring scratches from branches as I fled back toward the cabin. Behind me, I heard laughter, my laughter echoing from multiple directions. Inside the cabin, I slammed and locked the door, then systematically closed and locked every window. It was a futile gesture. Whatever was happening transcended physical barriers. Still, the routine helped calm my racing thoughts. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I returned to the basement and methodically went through every tape, every journal entry. As the day faded into evening, a pattern emerged. Dr. Reiner had discovered the Echo people by accident while conducting acoustic experiments in the forest. At first, he thought they were some kind of auditory phenomenon, sound waves trapped and distorted by unusual geographic features. As his experiments continued, he realized they were something far more complex. The Echo People existed in a parallel dimension that occasionally overlapped with ours. They began as perfect mimics, reflections without independent thought. But each time they absorbed energy from our world, they became more autonomous, more real. Reiner's later journal entries grew increasingly paranoid. He became convinced his reflection was watching him, planning to replace him. The final entries documented his creation of a containment system using carefully placed stones harvested from a cave system beneath the property. Stones, naturally, attuned to both dimensions. The stone circle wasn't just a curiosity, it was a prison. As night fell, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. Through the window I saw headlights, Floyd's truck pulling up beside the cabin. Floyd himself looked haggard when I opened the door, his clothes dirty, eyes sunken with exhaustion. "You're still you," he said, studying my face. "There's still time." "Time for what? What's happening to me?" I demanded. Floyd pushed past me into the cabin, quickly checking windows and doors. "I'm a guardian, Mr. Harrison. My family has watched over this property for generations, maintaining the containment system Dr. Reiner created. The stone circle," he nodded. "The circle keeps the Echo People from spreading beyond the forest boundaries, keeps them trapped in the thin spots." He glanced at my manuscript pages. "But they're getting stronger. They found a way to channel energy through creative minds, writers, artists, musicians, anyone who creates. They've been using me," I said, the truth settling like ice in my stomach. "And you've been letting them," Floyd countered. "Every page you write feeds them, strengthens their connection to our reality." "How do I stop it?" Floyd's expression was grim. "The circle needs maintenance. Blood from our reality, human blood, reinforces the dimensional barriers." I backed away. "You want my blood?" "Just enough for the ritual," he assured me. "I've done it myself for years, but they caught me 2 weeks ago, kept me trapped in a thin spot until I managed to break free." He rolled up his sleeve, showing several fresh cuts along his forearm. "It weakened the barriers temporarily, but it should be enough for us to reinforce them properly." As Floyd explained the ritual, something nagged at the back of my mind. A detail from one of the tapes I'd listened to earlier. Dr. Reiner said, "The Echo People were refugees," I said suddenly, "escaping from something consuming their dimension." Floyd's eyes narrowed. "They tell that story to gain sympathy. Don't believe it. But the oldest recordings are manipulations," Floyd interrupted. "The Echo People aren't victims, Mr. Harrison. They're parasites. They'll say anything, show you anything to gain your trust." Outside, the wind rose suddenly, trees bending in a gust that seemed targeted at the cabin itself. The windows rattled in their frames. "They know what we're planning," Floyd said. "We need to hurry." As we gathered supplies for the ritual, candles, salt, a silver bowl Floyd produced from his truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Fragments of dreams and manuscript pages swirled in my mind. What if my novels had always been about the Echo People? What if I'd been subconsciously aware of them my entire career? My stories often featured doppelgangers, parallel dimensions, realities bleeding into each other. Floyd handed me a knife. Just a small cut, enough to fill the grooves in each stone. The wind howled louder, and somewhere in its roar, I heard voices, dozens of them, all speaking with variations of my voice, pleading, warning. I looked at Floyd, really looked at him for the first time. His movements seemed too precise, his eyes too focused. No signs of the exhaustion he should be showing after being trapped for weeks. "You're not Floyd," I said quietly. His expression didn't change. "We need to complete the ritual. The real." Floyd warned me to stick to the paths, to avoid the stone circle completely. I backed toward the door. You're one of them. His smile was nothing like Floyd's. Not just one of them. The first of them. The original Echo. His form flickered slightly, revealing something less human underneath. And you, Edward Harrison, are the perfect Echo we've been waiting for. I ran for the door, but my body suddenly felt wrong, heavy, and uncoordinated, as if I was moving through water. The thing pretending to be Floyd watched with clinical interest. Your transformation is accelerating, he observed. The merger has already begun. What merger? I gasped, leaning against the wall for support. Between you and your Echo, between original and reflection. He approached slowly. It happens to everyone who stays too long. The difference is that you're special, Edward. You're the perfect Echo, the prophecy foretold. What prophecy? My vision blurred, the room seeming to double and shift around me. The one you've been writing. He gestured to my manuscript. The story of how the perfect Echo will break the barriers permanently. With tremendous effort, I lunged for my typewriter, grabbing the manuscript pages. If what he said was true, if this document somehow contained the key to breaking dimensional barriers, I needed to destroy it. The fake Floyd moved with inhuman speed, but I was closer. I shoved the pages into the fireplace and grabbed a match. Stop! His voice resonated at a frequency that made my teeth ache. You don't understand what you're preventing. I struck the match. I'm preventing you from stealing my life. You've already stolen it yourself, he hissed. The match fell onto the pages, which caught immediately. As flames consumed my manuscript, a high-pitched wail filled the cabin, not coming from the fake Floyd, but from the walls themselves, from the air, from everywhere at once. The fake Floyd's form destabilized, flickering rapidly between human appearance and something else. A shadowy figure with too many angles. You've only delayed the inevitable, he said, voice distorting. The perfect Echo can be written again. Will be written again. As the last pages burned, he disappeared entirely. Not running away, but simply ceasing to exist in our dimension. I collapsed beside the fireplace, exhaustion overwhelming me. Through the window I could see the forest shimmering strangely, as if viewed through heat waves. The thin spots were destabilizing without the manuscript to anchor them. But burning the pages had only bought me time. I could feel it. The wrongness. Inside me, the sense of being both myself and not myself simultaneously. What had the fake Floyd said? The merger had already begun. I needed to know the truth. With the last of my strength, I dragged myself to the basement and dug through Dr. Reiner's oldest recordings. If I was going to fight this, I needed to understand exactly what was happening to me. The answer came from a tape labeled simply First Contact, 1972. Dr. Reiner's voice, younger but recognizable. I've confirmed the entities are not mere acoustic anomalies but conscious beings existing in a parallel dimension. They claim their reality is being consumed by what they call the silence, a void that erases existence itself. They've found refuge in the thin places between dimensions, specifically in this forest where the barrier is naturally weak. A pause. Then, they exist as echoes of us because they have no physical form of their own. They can only interact with our world by reflecting what already exists here. Over time, with enough energy, they can stabilize these reflections into independent entities. Another pause, longer this time. They've shown me what happens when their dimension fails completely. The Echo people either dissipate or merge with their original counterparts in our world. The merged beings retain memories from both existences, but are fundamentally changed, neither fully human nor fully Echo. The recording continued, describing Reiner's efforts to help the Echo people survive without harming humans. The stone circle was indeed a containment system, but its purpose wasn't imprisonment. It was stabilization, creating a safe zone where the Echo People could exist without dimensions collapsing. Everything the fake Floyd had told me was a lie. As this realization hit, another wave of dizziness swept over me. Looking at my hand, I saw it turn transparent again. But this time, instead of seeing bone, I saw swirling patterns of light, complex geometries that felt strangely familiar. I was changing, merging with my Echo self, and I couldn't stop it. With sudden clarity, I knew what I had to do. The stone circle was key, not to imprisonment, but to balance. Reiner had created it as a stabilization point between dimensions. If I could reach it, perhaps I could use it to separate myself from the Echo merging with me. Outside, the forest had transformed. Trees flickered between seasons, summer green one moment, autumn gold the next, then winter bareness. The paths seemed to multiply before my eyes, overlapping like double-exposed photographs. I followed what I hoped was the correct trail toward the stone circle, my body growing lighter with each step. Sometimes my feet didn't quite touch the ground. Sometimes I could see through my own arms to the forest floor below. The clearing, when I reached it, was a storm of dimensional chaos. The stones still stood in their circle, but they phased in and out of visibility. Around them, shapes moved, dozens of Echo People in various stages of manifestation. Some looked almost solid, others were mere suggestions of human form. In the center stood my doppelganger, my Echo, watching me with an expression of sad recognition. "You know the truth now," he said as I approached. I nodded. "You're refugees, not invaders. We never wanted to harm anyone, only to survive." He gestured around at the failing dimensional barriers, but the process isn't perfect. When an Echo and original merge, both are changed forever. "Is that what's happening to me?" He nodded. "You're becoming neither fully human nor fully Echo. A bridge between worlds. Can it be reversed?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "No, but it can be completed properly." He stepped forward. "The perfect Echo prophecy isn't about destruction, Edward. It's about salvation, about creating a stable bridge between dimensions so both can survive." I looked down at my increasingly transparent hands. "What do I need to do?" "Accept the merger. Don't fight it." He held out his hand, my hand, "and help us maintain the balance Reiner created." I hesitated. "How do I know this isn't another manipulation?" "You've seen the truth. In Reiner's recordings, in your own writing." His expression, my expression, was earnest. "Your novels have always been about us, Edward. Some part of you has always known we exist." He was right. My stories had featured these concepts for years. Dimensional barriers, doppelgangers, merging realities. What if those weren't just imagination? What if they were memories leaking through from alternate versions of myself? I took his hand. The sensation was indescribable, like touching an electrical current that didn't hurt, like merging with warm water while remaining solid. We connected, and knowledge flooded through me. Centuries of Echo existence, the desperate flight from their failing dimension, the careful balance Reiner had established, and the truth about the Guardians. A lineage not of protectors, but of merged beings who maintained the balance between worlds. Floyd was one of them. Now I would be too. As our forms merged completely, the dimensional storm subsided. The stone circle stabilized, its symbols glowing with renewed energy. The Echo People retreated to their thin spots, no longer in danger of dissipating. When I returned to the cabin, I was both Edward Harrison and not, a merged being with memories and personality traits from both dimensions. I gathered my remaining belongings, packed Reiner's journals and recordings, and prepared to leave. I had a new novel to write, one that would subtly strengthen the dimensional barriers while allowing controlled energy transfer to sustain the Echo People. Each reader would unknowingly contribute a tiny amount of creative energy, spread thin enough to harm no one. As I loaded my car, I noticed a rental vehicle coming up the access road. A woman emerged, young, anxious-looking, clutching a laptop bag. "Mr. Harrison," she called. "I'm Jennifer Marsh. Your publisher sent me. They were worried when they couldn't reach you." I smiled, knowing what would happen next. The cycle continuing, as it had for generations. "Perfect timing," I said, gesturing toward the cabin. "I was just leaving. The place is available if you're looking for somewhere quiet to work." Her eyes lit up. "Really? I've been struggling with my manuscript for months." "The isolation helps," I assured her, loading the last box into my car. "There's plenty of inspiration in these woods." As I drove away, I watched in the rearview mirror as Jennifer carried her bags into the cabin. Soon she would find Reiner's recordings. Soon she would start having vivid dreams and writing better than ever before. Soon she would meet her echo self, and I would be watching from the trees, maintaining the balance, ensuring both our worlds survived. In the passenger seat beside me lay my new manuscript, beginning with words I knew would resonate across dimensions. I still remember the exact moment when the woods first spoke to me. The voices started the first night I slept by the lake. They whispered from the water, soft and distant at first, like rain tapping on glass. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe my mind playing tricks after the long drive to Lake Stillwater. But deep down I knew better. Something in that unnaturally still water was calling to me. My name is Eleanor Foster. I'm a scientist who studies fish, an ichthyologist if you want to be fancy about it. 3 weeks ago, I moved into my grandfather's old cabin on the north shore of Lake Stillwater, Minnesota. The locals call it the lake that hungers. I should have listened. I came here to study the strange fish mutations that started showing up last spring. Fish with extra eyes, fish with weird growths that looked almost like hands. The university thought it might be pollution. I thought it might make my career. We were both wrong. The cabin smelled like dust and pine when I first walked in. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like party streamers. Dad never wanted to talk about why Grandpa abandoned this place 40 years ago. Now I know why. On my second day, I headed into town for supplies. The only diner in Stillwater Falls had checkered floors and booths with cracked red seats. That's where I met Martha Wilson, the owner. "Foster?" she said, eyebrows shooting up when I introduced myself. "Any relation to Joseph Foster?" When I told her he was my grandfather, she set down her coffee pot and studied me like I was something. "In a museum. Your grandfather was an interesting man," she said slowly. "You know what the locals call that lake, don't you?" "No what?" "The lake that hungers." Martha leaned in closer. 4 people drowned there last year alone, bodies never found. I laughed it off. I'm a scientist, not someone who believes in ghost stories. The lake is over 900 feet deep in some parts, I explained. That's why they couldn't find the bodies. Martha just shrugged. "If you say so, Dr. Foster." The next day, I hiked around the lake's edge, taking water samples and photos. That's when I found the rock paintings. They were hidden under an overhang near the water, faded red drawings showing stick figures with long, webbed hands emerging from water. Some had too many eyes. I took pictures figuring they were just old Native American artwork. When my research, Assistant Paul arrived with the sonar equipment, things got interesting. The first readings showed something odd, cave-like spaces under the lake bed where no caves should be. "This can't be right," Paul said, frowning at the screen. "It looks like there's a whole system of tunnels down there." That night, while organizing my desk, I found my grandfather's old journals tucked in a drawer. The pages were yellow and brittle, filled with messy handwriting. "The voices are louder tonight," one entry read. "They're calling me to the water. I must resist." I closed the journal, telling myself it was just the ramblings of an old man. But that night I had trouble sleeping. The next morning, a local fisherman named Thomas Grant stopped by. He was tall and weathered, with hands rough as tree bark. "You're Joseph's granddaughter," he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I'm Eleanor. Let me give you some advice. His eyes were dead serious. Never go in that water after sunset, not for any reason. I nodded politely, but inside I was rolling my eyes. More superstitions. That night I decided to prove them all wrong. I set up underwater lights and put on my diving gear. The water was cold and clear near the surface. As I went deeper, my flashlight caught something glowing in the darkness. Patterns of blue-green light shifting and swirling like they were alive. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. That's when I heard the voices, not with my ears, inside my head. Eleanor, welcome home. Something changed in Paul after we collected the deep water samples. It was subtle at first. He'd stare at the lake for long periods, or I'd catch him whispering to himself. When I asked if he was feeling okay, he'd smile too widely and say he'd never felt better. Meanwhile, the fish I was studying were showing even stranger changes. A trout I'd caught had what looked like a tiny human hand growing from its side. Another had 3 eyes arranged in a triangle. Their DNA was mutating at impossible rates, like something was deliberately changing them. I went back to the diner to talk to Martha. The place was empty except for us. Those drownings you mentioned, I said casually. When exactly did they happen? Martha wiped her hands on her apron. 3 college kids last summer. They went swimming at night. She shook her head. We never found them, just like the others. Others? This lake has been swallowing people since before my grandmother's time. That night, I had the first dream. I was swimming in darkness, so complete it felt solid. Something brushed against my legs, my arms, my face. Then came the voices, speaking words I couldn't understand, but somehow knew the meaning of. Join us. Become. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat that smelled like lake water. The next night, I woke to the sound of footsteps. Paul was walking toward the front door, eyes open but empty. I grabbed his arm, but he was surprisingly strong, shoving me aside. I had to tackle him to stop him from going outside. The water, he mumbled. They're waiting. After that, I started locking his door from the outside at night. 2 days later, Thomas disappeared. His empty boat was found drifting in the morning mist, the bottom covered in a clear, thick slime that smelled like rotting fish. The search party found nothing. I offered to dive, but the sheriff politely declined. The look in his eyes said he already knew Thomas wasn't coming back. That afternoon, our sonar picked up something massive moving at the bottom of the lake. The reading showed it was at least 30 feet long. Equipment malfunction, Paul said, but his voice was flat, unconvincing. I decided to investigate myself. The next day, while Paul was in town, I took the boat out and dove deeper than before. About 80 feet down, I found an underwater cave entrance. The opening was too symmetrical to be natural, its edges smooth like they'd been carved. I didn't go in. Even I'm not that foolish. But I did notice strange markings around the entrance, similar to the rock paintings I'd found. When I got back, Paul was acting strange again. I caught him collecting a weird reddish algae from specific spots along the shoreline. Later, through the kitchen window, I saw him eating it by the handful. That night, a storm hit. The wind howled and rain lashed against the windows. The power went out around midnight. I was lighting candles when I saw Paul standing in front of the living room window, his silhouette outlined by lightning flashes. He was talking to his reflection, but the reflection was moving independently, its mouth forming different words than Paul's. I stayed hidden in the hallway, watching, until I heard Paul say in a voice not quite his own, "She's perfect. Her bloodline is pure." The reflection seemed to laugh, though I heard no sound. I pretended to sleep that night, but kept one eye open. Around 3 a.m., Paul got up and walked silently toward the front door. I followed him at a distance. The storm had passed, leaving the night clear and cold. The moon reflected on the lake's surface like a giant eye watching us. Paul walked straight to the shore and waded in up to his knees. The water began to move, rippling in ways that defied physics. Then they emerged. I'll never forget what I saw. They were shaped like people, but wrong in every way. Their skin was nearly transparent, showing organs that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Their fingers were long and webbed, their eyes huge and black. Worst of all, their faces looked almost human. With expressions of hunger and curiosity, they surrounded Paul, touching him with those horrible hands. He didn't scream. He smiled. The tallest creature opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and spoke. The sound was like water rushing over stones, but I understood every word. "The vessel is ready. Is she?" Paul turned and pointed directly at my hiding spot. "Soon," he said. "Her resistance is stronger than expected." I ran back to the cabin, locked myself in the bathroom, and vomited until there was nothing left. When morning came, Paul acted like nothing had happened. That day, I drove to the local library and found an old collection of Native American documents. The librarian gave me strange looks as I frantically flipped through them. Finally, I found it. A treaty from 1843 between settlers and the local tribe. It mentioned a pact with those who dwell beneath the still water. The tribe avoided the lake entirely, believing it to be a doorway to another world. When I got back, Paul was gone. I used the opportunity to check his room and found his skin was literally peeling off in sheets, revealing a slick, scale-like layer underneath. Something made me check under the cabin that evening. I found a trapdoor hidden under an old rug. It led to a small stone chamber with an altar-like table in the center. On shelves around the room were jars containing preserved organs unlike anything I'd ever seen. Gills that looked partially. Human webbed appendages and things I couldn't identify. In a wooden box, I found letters written by my grandfather. They revealed the horrible truth. He had been the leader of a cult that worshipped the lake entities. They believed these creatures were ancient beings from another dimension who used the lake as a gateway. My family hadn't just studied them, we had helped them. I was still processing this when I heard the cabin door open. Paul walked in, followed by Paul. Two identical versions of my research assistant stood staring at me. Then a third, Paul, appeared behind them. "You've seen too much," they said in unison. "But it doesn't matter now, the water is rising." I looked past them through the window. The lake level had indeed risen dramatically, water already covering the road that led to town. "What do you want?" I whispered. The nearest Paul smiled, his teeth slightly too sharp. "We want you, Eleanor Foster. We've always wanted you." I locked myself in my bedroom that night, pushing a dresser against the door as the Pauls took turns trying to convince me to come out. I had my grandfather's old ham radio and desperately tried to call for help. "This is Dr. Eleanor Foster at Lake Stillwater. Emergency. Someone please respond." After hours of static, a voice finally came through. My voice. "This is Dr. Eleanor Foster at Lake Stillwater. Emergency. Someone please respond." It was my own transmission from minutes earlier. I tried again and again, but each time I only received my own messages from different points in time, some from hours ago, others seemingly from days in the future. I realized with growing horror that the lake water somehow bent time itself. Past, present, and future were all connected through its depths. Morning came, and with it a knock at the front door. It was Martha, looking concerned. "Are you all right, Eleanor? People in town are worried. The lake's rising and no one's seen Paul for days." I let her in, desperate for human contact. That was my mistake. As she stepped inside, I noticed water dripping from her sleeve. Her eyes reflected light wrong, like a cat's. "You poor thing," she said, her voice gentle but wrong somehow. "You don't need to fight it. Your grandfather understood in the end." "You're one of them," I whispered. Martha smiled. Not exactly. Think of me as a guardian. My family has served them for generations. We protect their secrets. She explained how the entities could create perfect duplicates of anyone they'd tasted, whether through consuming flesh or simply making contact with blood or saliva. The Paul you know has been gone for days, she said. These are just echoes, vessels. The Pauls surrounded me as Martha spoke, their movements too coordinated, like puppets controlled by one mind. They need you, Eleanor, your bloodline. Foster. Their blood calls to them. Why do you think your grandfather selected this spot? Why do you think you felt drawn here? One of the Pauls reached for me. I ran for the door but doubled over with sudden shooting pain in my abdomen. Martha smiled knowingly. Ah, you've felt it already. The beginning. What are you talking about? I gasped. Check your stomach, she said softly. My shirt had risen slightly, revealing my stomach. It was distended, the skin stretched tight and veined with blue. Something moved beneath the surface. Impossible, I whispered. I haven't. Not physically, no, Martha said. They don't need that. They've been calling to you through the water. Every time you drank, bathed, swam, you've been drinking them in for weeks. Now. The entities revealed more through Martha. They weren't separate creatures, but cells of a vast consciousness that had existed for millennia. Humans were just temporary vessels, means to an end. Your grandfather recognized their greatness, Martha said. But he wasn't strong enough to host the Prime. You are, your mind, your body, they're perfect. As she spoke, the cabin began to flood, water seeping through floorboards and walls. I knew then I had to destroy everything, all my research, all evidence of what lived in the lake. If this knowledge spread, if others came looking, I knocked over the kerosene lamp deliberately. Flames caught quickly on the dry wood. What are you doing? Martha screamed, her voice suddenly inhuman. I grabbed my grandfather's journals and ran outside as the cabin began to burn. The entities couldn't follow immediately. Fire was apparently something they feared. The road was completely flooded, but the lake had frozen near the far shore. My only escape was to cross the ice. 2 weeks later, I sat in a hospital bed in the neighboring town of Pine Ridge, telling my story to skeptical police officers. They found no evidence of Paul, Martha, or anything unusual at the lake beyond my burned cabin. Dr. Foster, you experienced extreme hypothermia crossing that ice, the doctor told me gently. Hallucinations are common in such cases. I might have believed them if not for the brain scans. The doctors couldn't explain the unusual activity in my temporal lobe or why I experienced blackouts. The first blackout happened 3 days after my rescue. I woke up knee-deep in the hospital fountain with no memory of how I got there. During a routine exam, a nurse noticed something strange, water in my lungs, despite no signs of drowning. The water had the same mineral composition as lake. Still water. Have you been near the lake again? The doctor asked. I hadn't. At least not that I remembered. They released me after 6 weeks. I rented an apartment in Pine Ridge, determined to stay away from Stillwater Falls and its lake. But each night, the dreams came stronger. Each morning, I found puddles of water by my bed. One night, I woke up on the shore of Lake Stillwater with no memory of the 30-mile journey from my apartment. That's when I knew. I wasn't fighting the lake anymore. I was becoming the lake. 6 months after my escape, I returned to the rebuilt cabin. Not by choice. My body simply took me there during a blackout. The construction crew had done a beautiful job. It looked just like my grandfather's original design. That night, compelled by urges I couldn't control, I walked into the lake. The water closed over my head, and I kept walking, deeper and deeper. I should have drowned. Instead, I breathed. The water filled my lungs like air, better than air. I saw them all, Thomas, Paul, Martha, and countless others, going back centuries. They weren't prisoners. They were parts of something vast and patient and ancient. That's when I understood the final horror. The lake wasn't contained. Its water seeped into the groundwater, spreading to wells and reservoirs throughout the county. slowly, patiently. Today I teach third grade at Stillwater Falls Elementary. My students love me. They say I'm the coolest teacher ever, especially when I take them on field trips to the lake. I teach them about the local ecosystem, about water conservation. I make sure they swim in the right spots. I smile when they drink from the water fountains at school. When the lights hit just right, my students sometimes ask about my eyes, why they seem to glow in the dark, why the pupils look strange. I tell them it's just a rare condition. They believe me. Children are so trusting. The water is patient, the water remembers, the water spreads, and soon everyone will hear the voices too. The end. I should have known something was wrong the moment I entered Fairfield. The cornfield stood tall and green, despite the drought that had turned the rest of Nebraska into a dusty wasteland. My name is Vincent Carter, and I'm a photojournalist who made the worst mistake of my life by coming to this town. It was supposed to be a simple assignment, document traditional farming practices in rural America. When my editor mentioned Fairfield's upcoming Harvest Festival, I thought it would make for perfect photos. Quaint, old-fashioned, maybe even a bit boring. I couldn't have been more wrong. The town looked like something from an old postcard. White, picket fences, a small main street with a general store, and endless fields of the tallest, healthiest corn I'd ever seen. People smiled and waved as I drove through. Too friendly, too perfect. Lawrence Holloway greeted me before I even stepped out of my car at the local diner. A tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Mr. Carter, we've been expecting you," he said, extending a hand that felt rough like tree bark. "I'm Lawrence Holloway, town council head. We're mighty pleased. You'll be documenting our little harvest celebration." I hadn't told anyone exactly when I'd arrive. "We've prepared the old Milner farmhouse for you," Lawrence continued. "Best views of the fields. Perfect for your photography." I found myself nodding, accepting his offer before I'd even thought it through. Something about his smile made it hard to say no. The farmhouse sat at the edge of a massive cornfield. From my bedroom window, I could see the stalks swaying even when there wasn't any wind. And the scarecrows, they were everywhere. Not the friendly, stuffed shirt kind from children's books. These were detailed, almost anatomically correct, with faces that seemed to have expressions. Some of their components didn't look like cloth or straw. On my second day, I met Rebecca Meller when she knocked on my door with a basket of welcome gifts. She was probably in her 40s, with long grey-streaked hair and a knowing smile. "Homemade preserves, bread, and a special tonic," she explained. "For your health during your stay, our ways keep us strong." I thanked her and set the basket aside, though something about the amber liquid in the small bottle made me uneasy. Later that night, I watched from my porch as people gathered in the fields before dawn, moving in patterns, touching the corn, whispering to it. The playground near the town square stopped me cold the next day. The children played normally enough, but their toys, corn-husk dolls positioned in strange poses. Some looked like they were kneeling before crude altars. Others appeared to be sinking into miniature fields. The children called it joining the growth. Lawrence found me there, studying the dolls. "Our traditions run deep," he explained. "The children learn early that we must honor the old ways. It's why our fields grow so tall when others fail." His hand gripped my shoulder. "You'll join us for the pre-festival dinner tomorrow night, yes? Everyone's very excited to meet you properly." I nodded, not knowing that by meet they meant something very different than I imagined. That night, I dreamed of being buried alive, corn stalks growing through my body as I screamed into the silent earth. The dinner at Lawrence's house felt strange from the start. Everyone watched me eat, barely touching their own food. Rebecca kept filling my glass with a sweet cider that made my head buzz. I lost track of time. The conversation blurred. Someone mentioned how perfect I was for this year's blessing. The next morning, I woke up back at the farmhouse with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My camera sat on the bedside table, though I didn't remember taking photos the night before. When I developed them in my makeshift darkroom, my hands started shaking. Photos from the dinner showed people with elongated limbs, their skin textured like corn husks. In one image, Lawrence appeared to have roots extending from his feet into the floorboards. I told myself it was just a problem with the chemicals. It wasn't. I decided to visit the local library to learn more about the town's history. The librarian, an elderly woman with cloudy eyes, seemed reluctant to help until I mentioned I was staying at Lawrence's invitation. The Holloway family has guided our prosperity for generations, she said, her tone reverent as she unlocked a cabinet of town records. What I found disturbing me. Every 10 years, the town's crop yield showed incredible spikes, each coinciding with reports of missing travelers or drifters. The records never stated this connection directly, but the pattern was unmistakable. Walking back to the farmhouse, I noticed the scarecrows had moved. Yesterday they faced the road. Today, they all faced my house. Their crude faces seemed to follow me as I hurried inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard chanting from the cornfield. I grabbed my camera and crept outside. Among the stalks, townspeople knelt in a circle, chewing raw corn kernels, their eyes rolled back. The corn around them swayed toward them like it was listening. I backed away but stepped on a dry branch. The crack echoed and every head turned toward me in perfect unison. I ran back to the house, locked the door, and pushed a dresser against it. The next morning, Rebecca arrived with more tonic. "You didn't drink the last bottle," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "You really must. It helps prepare you." "Prepare me for what?" I asked. "The festival, of course. It can be overwhelming for outsiders." I pretended to drink it while she watched, then poured it down the drain after she left. But that afternoon, I still experienced blackouts. 2 hours vanished while I was walking near the fields. I found myself standing before a circle of scarecrows, mud on my knees like I'd been kneeling. Desperate for answers, I broke into the town hall that night, searching for records Lawrence had mentioned. In the basement, I found a hidden door behind, a bookshelf. It led to a root cellar that smelled of damp earth and something sickly sweet. My flashlight revealed jars lining the walls. Inside were preserved human remains, hands, feet, organs, all showing plant-like growths, green tendrils wrapped around fingers, roots extended from palms. A heart had sprouts growing from its chambers. On a stone table lay a leather-bound journal, Lawrence's family journal, dating back to the town's founding. I took photos of as many pages as I could, then replaced it exactly as I found it. I decided to leave immediately, but my car wouldn't start. Someone had cut the fuel line. When I tried to walk out of town, I found the roads blocked by washouts that hadn't been there the day before. My cell phone showed no signal, though it had been working fine earlier. As the full moon rose, I watched from my window as the cornfields seemed to ripple and sway, forming patterns like giant fingerprints. And in the center of the field, the corn parted, revealing people walking into a clearing. They knelt, touching the ground, and the earth moved beneath their hands. I was trapped in Fairfield, and the harvest festival was only 3 days away. Spent the night translating the photos I'd taken of Lawrence's journal. The handwriting changed over generations, but the message remained clear. The first settlers had found the land barren until they discovered something beneath it, an entity they called the Growth. It offered a deal, fertility and abundance, in exchange for offerings, not animal sacrifices as I first assumed, but human vessels. The journal described a joining, where chosen people became part of the growth, their bodies and minds feeding the entity while it spread. The morning light brought no comfort as I stared at the final entry, dated just 1 week ago. the photographer. We'll make an ideal vessel, well-traveled, no local connections, strong. The growth is pleased with our selection. A knock at the door startled me. A little girl stood there, her blonde hair streaked with what looked like fine corn silk. "Mr. Holloway says it's time for your preparation," she said, her voice oddly adult. "The baby is coming." "What baby?" I asked. "The new baby. We all want to see." "You should come too." Curiosity overcame my fear. I followed her to a house at the edge of town where a crowd had gathered. Inside, a woman lay on a bed, her stomach swollen and moving in unnatural ways. Rebecca knelt beside her, whispering encouragements. The birth happened quickly. The infant emerged with pale green skin and hair like corn silk. Its back had a pattern like corn leaves. The crowd murmured in approval as Rebecca held it up. "The growth blesses us with another perfect child," she announced. Every eye in the room turned to me, and soon it will bless us again. I backed away, bumping into Lawrence. "Don't be afraid, Vincent," he said. "You've been chosen for something magnificent." I ran. Back at the farmhouse, I gathered my equipment, determined to document everything before trying again to escape. That's when I noticed something moving under my skin, small ridges traveling along my veins. When I pressed them, I felt something hard and seed-like. That night, I followed the townspeople to a clearing in the center of the cornfield. Rebecca stood in the middle, arms raised. The ground beneath her feet pulsed and split open. What emerged was impossible. A massive tangle of roots that formed a vaguely human shape, towering 15 feet high. Faces pressed outward from within its twisted form, mouths opening and closing like fish. "The growth hungers," Rebecca called out. "Who will join?" An old man stepped forward. "My time has come," he said, the root being reached out, wrapping tendrils around the man. He didn't struggle as it pulled him in, his skin merging with the woody surface. His face remained visible, eyes open, as he was absorbed. Then, most terrifying of all, he spoke. "I see everything now. I am everywhere the roots touch." I must have made a noise, because suddenly everyone turned toward my hiding place. I ran, the corn seeming to grab at me, stalks bending to block my path. When I finally broke free of the infield, Rebecca was waiting at the farmhouse. "The tonics were preparing you," she said calmly. "The seedlings are already growing inside you. You're becoming part of something eternal." "You're insane," I gasped, feeling the things moving faster. "Under my skin." "We've been cultivating this bloodline for generations," she continued. "Selective breeding to create perfect vessels, but we need outside blood occasionally." She touched my face. "Your consciousness will join the growth. Your body will travel, spreading our gift." "Like a disease," I spat. "Like life," she corrected. "The growth has been patient, contained to our little town, but it's time to expand." I locked myself in the bathroom and examined my arm. The moving ridges had grown. When I cut one open, a green sprout emerged from my flesh. I spent the night taking photographs of my transformation and the town. Through my camera lens, I could see what was invisible to the naked eye, the growth's true form, a massive humanoid, shape of intertwined roots spreading beneath the entire town. It pulsed with a sickly green light that connected to every resident. By morning, my skin had developed a husk-like texture in patches. The pain was excruciating, like being torn apart from the inside. Rebecca arrived with more tonics. "This will ease the transition," she said. "Fighting only makes it painful." "What happens to me, my mind?" I asked. "You join the collective consciousness. All who have joined remain aware. They see through the eyes of every plant the growth controls." Her expression turned rapturous. "Imagine feeling the sun on 1,000 leaves, drinking water through miles of roots. It's transcendence. It's death," I argued. "No, Vincent. The opposite. Those who join never truly die. Even the original settlers are still with us." She took me to the town hall. Beneath it lay a chamber larger than the root cellar. In glass tanks filled with cloudy liquid floated the preserved bodies of colonial-era people. Their skin had turned bark-like, roots extending from their limbs. Their eyes opened as we entered. They are the first, Rebecca explained. Their bodies serve as anchor points. They dream the dreams of the growth. I saw their lips moving silently, eyes tracking our movements. Conscious, aware, but unable to scream. Back at the farmhouse, I examined the photos I'd taken. They revealed something terrifying. The growth could control its transformed humans like puppets. In one image, I caught Lawrence standing still while root-like appendages connected to his spine, moving his limbs. The harvest festival was tomorrow. From snippets of conversation I'd overheard, I understood it would be my joining ceremony. The entire town would gather to watch as the growth consumed me, using my photojournalist background to help it spread to cities I'd visited. That night, the pain became unbearable. Looking in the mirror, I saw my eyes had developed a greenish tint. Sprouts pushed through my forearms. I could feel roots trying to break through the soles of my feet. I knew I couldn't escape or fight directly, but I remembered something from Lawrence's journal. The growth feared fire and certain chemicals. It was why the town rejected modern farming methods that might contaminate the soil. The agricultural supply store was unlocked. Nobody in Fairfield stole from neighbors. I took every container of herbicide I could find and made my way to the water tower that fed the irrigation system. It wasn't much, but it might buy me time. As I poured the chemicals into the water supply, I felt a presence behind me. "We can't let you do that," Lawrence said. He wasn't alone. Half the town stood with him, their movements jerky, puppeted. I ran toward the fuel storage tanks by the town's generator. If I couldn't poison the growth, maybe I could burn it. The townspeople followed, moving with unnatural speed. Rebecca's voice called out, "He belongs to the growth now! Bring him to the field!" I felt the seedlings inside me responding to her voice, spreading faster. My legs almost gave out as roots tried to anchor me to the ground. With the last of my strength, I reached the fuel tanks and broke the valve. As gasoline spilled across the ground, I struck a match. The last thing I remember was the cornfields catching fire, the growth screaming through 100 human mouths, and my own body being consumed by both flames and roots. They say I died in that fire. The official report called it an agricultural accident. Chemical exposure causing mass hallucinations explained the townspeople's strange behavior before they evacuated. Fairfield became a ghost town, the fields nothing but ash. 6 months later, a journalist investigating my disappearance found my camera in the ruins. Most of the photos were destroyed, but a few survived, showing the growth's true form and my transformation. The authorities dismissed the images as damaged film creating bizarre effects. They ignored reports of unusual plant growth radiating outward from where Fairfield once stood. They didn't connect it to the small farming communities across the Midwest, suddenly adopting heritage farming techniques from Fairfield survivors. They didn't notice the satellite images showing crop patterns forming what looked like an organic circuit across 5 states. And they haven't found all of me. Parts survived, buried in the rich soil, carried by the wind as spores. I am everywhere the roots touch now. I see through 1,000 eyes. I feel the sun on countless leaves. In a community garden in a city I once visited, something grows from what was once my buried hand. It looks like corn, but one stalk has developed something like a camera lens. It turns toward passers-by, capturing their images, selecting. The growth is spreading, and it's hungry for new vessels. I try to warn them through the rustling of leaves, but no one understands. No one ever looks closely at their food, at the roots beneath their feet, at the green world slowly closing in. No one until it's too late. The trees have eyes. I know that sounds crazy, but I've seen them watching me. Ever since I came to this valley, I've felt them following my every move. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, leftover fear from Vietnam. But now I know better. Now I know the truth. My name is Elijah Montgomery. 3 months ago, I came to this remote Appalachian Valley to escape the world and the memories of war that haunted me. As a wildlife photographer, I told myself I was here to document endangered species. But really, I was running away. Turns out, I ran straight into something far worse than what I left behind. I still remember my first day here. The valley looked like a picture from a fairy tale. Thick forests, crystal-clear streams, and mountains that seemed to cradle the land in a protective embrace. I found an old hunting cabin near a creek and set it up as my home and studio. 6 months' worth of supplies, my cameras and solitude. It was everything I needed to heal. "You picked a strange place to hide," said a voice behind me as I was setting up my tripod by the creek on my 3rd day. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The man was tall and weathered, with eyes that seemed older than his face. He introduced himself as Victor Hawkins, a local hunter who occasionally checked on the cabin. "Not hiding," I said, focusing my camera on a hawk circling above. "Working." Victor watched me silently for a moment. "You military?" he finally asked. I nodded. No point denying it. "Thought so." "Got that look about you?" He gestured to the valley around us. "This place might seem peaceful, but these are watchful woods. Been here all my life, and there are still parts I won't go near." His voice dropped, especially after dark. I laughed. It doff. After what I'd seen in Vietnam, how scary could some trees and shadows be? "You'll want to be gone before winter," Victor added, already turning to leave. "Things change here when the snow comes." I dismissed his warning as local superstition. I had my research to focus on anyway, but I couldn't help noticing strange things over the next few weeks. The wildlife behaved oddly. A fox and rabbit drinking side by side at the creek. Predators ignoring easy prey. Birds falling silent all at once. About a month in, I found the settlement. I was tracking what looked like bear prints when I stumbled upon it. A small cluster of buildings, maybe 10 structures in total, nestled in a clearing. They looked ancient, but strangely intact, as if time moved differently around them. Inside the largest building, I found a leather-bound journal. The writing was faded, but still readable. May 12th, 1834. "There are spaces between the trees where the air grows thin. William saw them again yesterday, those who walk between. They leave no tracks, yet the forest parts for them. God help us, if they ever take notice of our presence." I should have packed up right then, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. At sunset, I set up my camera for some time-lapse shots of nocturnal animals. When I developed the film the next day, I noticed strange lights dancing between the trees at specific spots, like fireflies, but moving with unnatural precision. I marked the coordinates on my map and found they formed a perfect hexagon across the valley floor. When Victor visited again, I showed him the journal and my map. "I told you," he said quietly. "Watchful woods." He traced the hexagon with his finger. "The old-timers call this place a thin place, where the wall between worlds isn't as solid as it should be." "You don't actually believe that, do you?" I asked. Victor's eyes met mine. "My great-grandfather was the first Hawkins to encounter them. Said they came through a crack in the air, like watching something step through a mirror. Since then, my family's been..." He paused, searching for the right word. "Keeping watch." "Watching for what?" I asked. "Making sure what's on the other side stays there." He stood abruptly. "You should leave, Mr. Montgomery, before the first snow." But I didn't leave. I couldn't. What kind of photographer walks away from the story of a lifetime? Besides, I told myself it was all superstition, maybe combined with some unusual geological phenomena. Strange lights, probably phosphorus from decaying matter. Animal behavior, perhaps some environmental factor I hadn't identified yet. The nightmares started a week later. In them, I stood at the edge of the forest at twilight, and thousands of eyes watched me from between the trees. Not animal eyes, not human eyes, but something in between. I woke each time with the same thought. I am not alone in this valley. But the scientist in me refused to believe. I blame PTSD from the war, isolation playing tricks on my mind, anything but the truth that was slowly revealing itself with each passing day. How wrong I was. How terribly, terribly wrong. The first snow came early, dusting the valley in white. Overnight, I woke to a different world, quieter, purer, and somehow more watchful. That same day, I developed a new batch of photos and felt my blood turn cold. In 3 separate shots of seemingly empty forest, shadowy figures stood between the trees, tall, thin silhouettes that my eyes had never registered while shooting. I checked my camera, thinking there might be a problem with the lens or film. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. Victor stopped by that afternoon, his face grim. "First snow came," he said, stomping his boots on my porch. "You're still here." "Just until spring," I replied, not meeting his eyes. "Can't travel now anyway." Victor noticed the photos spread across my table. He picked one up without asking, his hand trembling slightly. "You've seen them then," he whispered. "It's just a film defect," I insisted, but my voice lacked conviction. Victor shook his head slowly. "They know you're here now. They've been watching you since you arrived, but now they're getting curious." He told me more about the valley's history, how the indigenous people never settled here, using it only for sacred rituals, how the miners who built that settlement I found had disappeared over a single night in 1845, leaving their belongings behind. How his family had served as boundary keepers for generations. Boundary between what? I asked. Between here and elsewhere, was all he would say. The next morning, I decided to map the entire valley. If these strange phenomena were real, there had to be a pattern. I spent days trudging through snow, taking coordinates and photographs. When I plotted everything on my map, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold my pencil. My cabin sat at the exact center of a massive geometric pattern, like a web of lines connecting all the places where strange lights had appeared. The abandoned settlement formed another focal point. The entire valley was a complex, mathematically perfect design that no human hand could have created. That night, the radio I kept for emergencies picked up nothing but static, except it wasn't random. There was a rhythm to it, almost like a language of clicks and pauses. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. At dawn, I set up my camera for time-lapse photography, pointing it at a clearing near the cabin. When I reviewed the footage that evening, I saw them. Figures moving through the forest at impossible speeds, visible only as blurs when slowed down. They walked upright but moved wrong, like puppets with too many joints. Victor didn't come the very next day or the day after. On the 3rd day, I hiked to his cabin, worried something had happened. I found him wandering in the snow half a mile from his home, delirious with hypothermia, repeating the same phrase over and over. "They wore my skin for a day. They wore my skin for a day." I brought him back to my cabin, built up the fire, and wrapped him in blankets. When he finally became lucid again, I noticed something strange about his arms. The skin had a texture to it, like tree bark, spreading in intricate patterns. "What happened to you?" I asked. "They're getting stronger," Victor whispered. "The boundary is thinning. They want to come through." "Who are they, Victor? What are they?" He closed his eyes. "They've been here longer than us. They watch, they learn, they become." A blizzard hit that night, the worst in decades according to my weather radio. The wind screamed around my cabin like a living thing, and the temperature dropped so low that the windows frosted on the inside. Victor's condition worsened, his skin continuing to change and his breathing becoming labored. During a brief lull in the storm, I checked my equipment outside. The snow had stopped falling around the cabin in a perfect circle 30 feet in diameter. Beyond that line, it piled in drifts taller than me. It was as if my cabin stood in the eye of a storm or at the center of attention. I took air pressure, readings, measured magnetic fields, documented everything I could. The air felt thicker somehow, and my compass spun wildly when pointed in certain directions. Light seemed to bend strangely around the edges of things. When I developed my latest photos, I found images of the abandoned settlement. Looking closer, I realized something I'd missed before. The buildings hadn't decayed naturally. They'd been preserved intentionally, like museum pieces or specimens under glass. That's when I finally accepted the truth. The settlement hadn't been abandoned. The people had been taken. And now, whatever took them was interested in me. Going through Victor's pack, I found old newspaper clippings about the settlement. It wasn't destroyed by a mining accident as local history claimed. 57 people had vanished overnight in the winter of 1845. Search parties found empty buildings, meals half-eaten on tables, but not a single body or sign of struggle. Just like Victor had told me, they disappeared. As the blizzard raged on, trapping us in the cabin, Victor began talking in his sleep, sometimes in voices that didn't sound like his own. And all around us, the watchful woods waited. On the 7th day of the blizzard, the storm broke just before sunset. The sudden silence woke me from a restless sleep. The world outside my window was transformed. Trees coated in ice that caught. The dying light, snow sculpted into impossible shapes by the wind. Perfect stillness, too perfect. I grabbed my camera and stepped outside, drawn by an impulse I couldn't explain. The air felt wrong against my skin, too dense, too alive. Each breath required effort, as if the oxygen itself had changed. Through my viewfinder, I saw them. At first, they looked like trees swaying in a non-existent wind. But trees don't move upright through the forest. Trees don't have limbs that bend at impossible angles. Trees don't turn to watch you pass. They were humanoid, but wrong. Bodies composed of twisted, branch-like appendages that constantly shifted and rearranged. Where faces should be, they had swirling patterns that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. My finger pressed the shutter button mechanically again and again as they moved closer. They never tried to hide now. They wanted me to see them. Inside the cabin, Victor screamed. I ran back to find him convulsing on the bed, his skin now more bark than flesh, splitting in places to reveal a green, fibrous material underneath. "They're coming through," he gasped. "The boundary's failing." "What do they want?" I demanded, fear making my voice harsh. "To become," he whispered. "They've been watching us for thousands of years, learning how to inhabit our world." Victor's eyes found mine, suddenly clear and terrified. "My family has kept them contained for generations. Rituals, sacrifices, the balance must be maintained." He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Blood of the Boundary Keeper," he said. "That's what the ritual needs, but I'm changing, becoming one of them. It has to be you now." He showed me what to do, an ancient ritual using his blood and mine. We drew symbols on the cabin floor and walls, symbols identical to the patterns I'd seen in the valley. As we worked, Victor explained between labored breaths. "They exist, slightly, out of phase with our reality," he said. "They can only partially manifest here unless they find anchors, physical forms they can replicate and inhabit after prolonged observation." "Like your skin," I said quietly, understanding at last. He nodded grimly. "They've been watching me my whole life, watching my father before me, learning how to become us." When the ritual was complete, Victor cut his palm and then mine, pressing our bleeding hands together over the center symbol. The air in the cabin seemed to ripple, like heat. Waves off summer asphalt, it won't last, Victor warned. Temporary strengthening of the boundary. Days, maybe. Enough time for you to what? I asked. To decide. That night, as Victor slept fitfully, I reviewed my photographs. The entities were clearly visible now, dozens of them throughout the forest. In some images, they seemed to be constructing something. Elaborate structures of twisted branches and ice that match the geometric patterns of the valley. I also noticed something else. In photos taken at specific locations, what Victor had called transition zones, normal physics seemed suspended. Light bent around objects. Snow hung in mid-air. In one image, a falling icicle was captured in 5 different positions simultaneously, as if time itself was stuttering. The valley contained dozens of these zones, places where reality thinned to the point of breaking. Near midnight, my radio crackled to life without being turned on. At first, I heard only static, but then patterns emerged, clicks and whirs that gradually resolved into something like speech. Not words exactly, but concepts transmitted directly into my mind. We have always been watching. We have seen your kind rise from the mud. We wish to share your experience of reality. We wish to become. Victor woke with a gasp, his eyes now flecked with amber lights that shouldn't exist in human irises. They're speaking to you, he whispered. They've chosen you. Chosen me for what? As a gateway, a vessel. His voice changed, becoming smoother, almost musical. Your consciousness is compatible. Your perception can be expanded. I realized with horror that I was no longer speaking to Victor. Not entirely. Something else looked out through his eyes. Now something ancient and patient and utterly inhuman. What happened to the settlers? I demanded. The people who disappeared in 1845? Victor's body smiled. The expression was wrong on his face, like a child wearing an adult's mask. They became part of us, as we became part of them. It gestured weakly toward the window. Outside, the entities had gathered in a circle around my cabin, swaying in unison. They opened the way without understanding, the thing in Victor continued. Digging into the earth, breaking ancient seals. We came through, we observed, we learned, and then you took them, I said. We merged. Their consciousness joined with ours, transcendence. Victor's body convulsed suddenly, his back arching impossibly. When he spoke again, it was his voice, panicked and breathless. Elijah, listen to me, he gasped. The mining equipment in the old settlement, explosives, still there. His body jerked again and the other voice returned. We offer you ascension, beyond physical form. We offer eternity. Outside, the entities moved closer to the cabin. The air shimmered around them, reality itself bending in their presence. And behind them, in the spaces between trees, I glimpsed something else. Visions of another place, a reality of twisted geometry and impossible colors. The portal was opening, and Victor's failing ritual wouldn't hold it back much longer. In that moment, my perception shattered like glass. My consciousness seemed to split, experiencing multiple realities simultaneously. I saw my cabin as it was now, surrounded by entities. I saw it as it had been a century ago, empty and abandoned. I saw it as it might be years from now, reclaimed by the forest, all existing at once. Victor, what remained of him, stared at me with eyes that pulsed with amber light. They're already inside you, he whispered. The change has begun. I looked down at my hands and saw it, subtle patterns forming under my skin, like branches spreading beneath ice. How long had this been happening? Had I been changing since I first arrived? Your photography equipment, Victor continued, fighting for control of his voice. They've been modifying it, using it to capture frequencies between realities, to strengthen the portal. I stumbled to my darkroom and examined my cameras. The subtle alterations were visible now that I knew to look. For them, strange crystalline growths inside the mechanisms, lenses that refracted light at impossible angles. Every photograph I'd taken had been feeding the portal. Every image had thinned the boundary between worlds. Outside, the entities pressed closer. Through the window, I could see dozens of them. Now, their branch-like limbs intertwining to form a living wall around the cabin. Behind them, the air itself seemed to tear open in places, revealing glimpses of that other reality, a plane of existence that operated by different rules. I felt a tug of longing, so intense, it buckled my knees. Part of me, the part that was, already changing, wanted to step through, to experience that other place, to transcend the limitations of human existence. Another part of me screamed in primal terror. In flashes of clarity, I remembered Victor's words, explosives in the old. Settlement. If the miners had accidentally opened this portal by breaking some ancient seal, perhaps it could be closed, the same way. Destroy the focal point, collapse the gateway. I grabbed my pack, stuffed it with supplies, and pushed past what used to be Victor. His body watched me with those amber eyes, no longer even pretending to be human. "You cannot escape what you are becoming," it said in that musical voice. "The transformation is already within you." I ran into the snow-covered forest. The entities made no move to stop me. Perhaps they knew I couldn't run from what was already happening inside my body. Or perhaps they were so confident in their victory that they saw no threat in my actions. The journey to the settlement was a nightmare of fractured perception. I experienced time at different rates. Sometimes an hour passed in what felt like seconds, other times a single step seemed to take hours. The forest around me shifted and changed, revealing pockets where physics worked differently. In one clearing, gravity pulled sideways. In another, sound became visible as ripples in the air. I passed what looked like human forms suspended in mid-transformation. Previous victims caught between states of being, preserved in dimensional pockets like insects in amber. When I finally reached the settlement, I found what I was looking for in an old storage building, mining explosives, ancient but potentially still functional. As I gathered them, my vision split again. I saw myself from outside my body, as if some part of my consciousness had already detached. The realization hit me. I wasn't just changing physically. My mind was being pulled apart, fragments of my identity being absorbed into the collective consciousness of the entities. I had to hurry. Using the coordinates from my map, I identified the center of the portal, a clearing where 6 transition zones converged. The air there was so thin it barely supported life, and reality itself seemed to flutter like a torn curtain. Through the gaps, I caught disturbing glimpses of the entity's true form, a vast, interconnected consciousness that extended through multiple dimensions, using these physical manifestations as mere appendages. My hands worked automatically, setting charges while my splintering mind tried to hold on to who I was. Memories of my life flashed before me. Childhood war, the faces of people I'd known. With each passing moment, they felt less like my own experiences and more like data I was processing. When the charges were set, I hesitated. Part of me, an increasingly vocal part, didn't want to close the portal. That part wanted to complete the transformation, to become one with the entity consciousness. It showed me visions of what awaited, existence beyond the constraints of time and space. Perception expanded to encompass realities I couldn't currently imagine. Join us, the voices whispered in my mind. Transcend. My fingers hovered over the detonator. So easy to give in, so easy to let go of human limitations, human pain, human memory. But then I remembered why I'd come to this valley in the first place. To heal from war, to reconnect with what made me human, not to abandon my humanity entirely. With the last of my willpower, I pressed the detonator. The explosion rippled through dimensions rather than just physical space. Reality itself seemed to warp and tear as the charges destroyed the focal points of the portal. The entities screamed, not in pain, but in surprise and frustration. They hadn't believed I could resist the lure of transcendence. As the gateway between worlds collapsed, a massive dimensional disruption cascaded through the valley. Multiple realities briefly merged and separated like oils of different densities, trying to mix. I saw everything at once: past, present, potential futures, alternative presents. The last thing I remember was a wall of distorted space rushing toward me like a tsunami. Then darkness. I woke in a hospital bed 3 weeks later. They told me a search and rescue team had found me unconscious at the edge of the valley when the spring thaw finally allowed access. Severe hypothermia, malnutrition, exposure. The doctors were amazed I'd survived. My cameras, journals, and film were gone. Confiscated, I later learned, by government researchers who'd arrived suspiciously quickly after my rescue. They asked endless questions about my time in the valley, what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. I told them nothing. Who would believe me anyway? The official story was simple. A wildlife photographer had gone slightly mad from isolation during a harsh winter. The strange phenomena I'd documented. Hallucinations caused by fungal spores in that old cabin. Victor Hawkins? A figment of my imagination. No such person existed in county records, but I know what I saw, I know what happened, and I know that I didn't fully escape. 6 months after leaving the hospital, I noticed it, subtle patterns forming on my skin, visible only under ultraviolet light. The same branching design I'd seen spreading across Victor's body. Slower, much slower, but unmistakable. I find myself creating intricate geometric patterns when I'm not paying attention, drawings identical to the formations in the valley. Sometimes I know things I shouldn't, see things others can't. The boundaries between realities no longer seem as solid to me as they once did. The entities may not have fully claimed me, but they left their mark, a seed of themselves, growing slowly within me. I've returned to photography. It's the only thing that feels right anymore. But I've discovered something disturbing. The subtle modifications to my equipment didn't disappear with the closure of the portal. My cameras still capture frequencies they shouldn't, still show glimpses of what exists between dimensions, and with each photograph I take, I feel reality bend ever so slightly, as if each image is a tiny tear in the fabric that separates our world from theirs. I wonder sometimes if this was their plan all along. The portal in the valley may be closed, but there are other ways to bridge realities. Slower ways, more subtle ways, through me. Through my art, through the images that now spread across the world. They are patient. They can wait. The trees have eyes, and now so do my photographs. In my dreams, I still hear them whispering, "We will become."